My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 62 years old, and my son-in-law told me to my face that his home wasn't a charity. So I bought his apartment building and became the landlord who doubled his rent. It's a long story, but one I feel I have to tell. A story of how hitting rock bottom can sometimes show you a foundation you never knew you had. Before we get into the thick of it, I'd love to know where you're all tuning in from. I'm here in Portland, Oregon, where the afternoon sun is just starting to dip behind the fir trees. Let me know in the comments what time it is in your corner of the world. It's comforting to know we're all connected by stories, no matter the distance. The scent of rosemary and thyme clinging to a perfectly roasted chicken usually filled any space with a sense of comfort, of home. It was my late husband Robert's favorite meal. He used to joke that my roast chicken had diplomatic powers, capable of brokering peace treaties. On this particular Tuesday evening, however, that familiar, comforting aroma felt like a lie, a fragrant mask over the suffocating tension in my daughter's apartment. This was my life now. I was a guest, a permanent, unspoken-for guest in the home of my only child, Sophia, and her husband, Ryan. 6 months had passed since Robert's heart had given out, suddenly and without warning, leaving me adrift in the cavernous silence of the 4-bedroom house we had built together over 40 years. Every room was a shrine to a memory, every creaking floorboard an echo of his footstep. Selling it had felt like an amputation, but a necessary one. I couldn't manage the upkeep, and more than that, I couldn't bear the ghosts. A significant portion of the sale had gone directly to Sophia and Ryan, a gift I'd framed as a loan to soften any blow to Ryan's pride. It helped them secure the down payment on this sleek, modern apartment with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. I was just happy to help them build their future, even if it meant dismantling my past. My role here was self-appointed but clear. I was to be invisible, useful, and uncomplaining. I became a silent whirlwind of domesticity. I navigated the grocery store aisles with tactical precision, hunting for sales. I learned the precise way Ryan liked his shirts laundered and ironed. I cooked meals that were both nutritious and budget-conscious. It was my way of paying rent, not with money, but with service. I was trying to weave myself into the fabric of their lives so seamlessly they wouldn't notice the extra thread. But lately, the fabric had begun to fray. Ryan's demeanor had shifted from welcoming to tolerant, and from tolerant to openly resentful. The man who had once hugged me at the door now barely offered a grunt from behind his laptop. His sighs grew heavier each time he saw the utility bills on the counter. His complaints about the economy felt less like general observations and more like personal accusations. I told myself he was just stressed. He was chasing a big promotion at his marketing firm, a promotion that seemed to be a moving target, and his salary was a constant source of anxiety. Tonight, however, the subtext became the text. The tension was a third person at our small dining table. I had taken extra care with the meal. The chicken was golden brown, the mashed potatoes were creamy, the green beans were crisp. I set it all down as an offering, a silent plea for peace. Sophia, my beautiful daughter with her father's gentle eyes, poked at her food. That worried line between her brows, the one that had first appeared after her father's funeral, seemed to have etched itself permanently into her skin. Ryan attacked his chicken leg as if it had personally wronged him, the scrape of his knife on the plate a sound that vibrated with aggression. "Another trip to the fancy grocery store, I see," he began, his voice deceptively light. He didn't look at me. "It was the same store as always, dear," I said softly, my hands folded in my lap. "The chicken was on sale." "Funny how on sale still ends up costing a fortune," he retorted, finally looking up. His eyes were flat and cold. Everything just adds up, Eleanor. The water for your longer showers, the electricity for the television you watch all day, the food. It's like managing a boutique hotel, except our only guest has a lifetime complimentary stay. A ball of ice formed in the pit of my stomach. This was it, the thing that I had been dreading, the conversation that I had been trying to outrun with good behavior and tireless service. Sophia shot him a look, a flash of panicked warning. She said, "Ryan, don't," whispered her voice, barely audible. He completely ignored her, his focus lasered in on me. He leant forward, placing his elbows on the table, a predator moving in for the kill. Sophia and I have goals, you know, a 5-year plan. We want to travel, see Italy, maybe buy a small cabin by the lake where we can escape the city. But it's impossible to save for a future when your present is being eaten away, piece by piece. He gestured vaguely around the apartment with his fork. This place isn't huge, but it feels crowded lately. The delicious chicken I had just eaten turned to ash in my mouth. He wasn't talking about the apartment. He was talking about me. I was the clutter. I was the financial drain. I was the reason his dreams were being deferred. I do my best to contribute, I stammered, my voice shrinking under the weight of his contempt. The cooking, the cleaning. And we appreciate that. We really do. But let's be honest. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table, a predator moving in for the kill. We're not running a charity here, Eleanor. This isn't a nonprofit for the recently bereaved. We have our own lives to build, our own future to fund. And right now, we're barely treading water. The words were brutal, designed to wound, and they hit their mark. But the true devastation came a moment later. I tore my eyes away from Ryan's smug face and looked at my daughter, my only child. I searched her face for a sign of protest, for a flicker of the fiery spirit she had as a girl. I waited for her to say, "That's enough, Ryan," for her to say, "She's my mother," for her to say, "She's sold her home for us." Sophia said nothing. She stared down at her plate as if it held the secrets to the universe. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her fork. Her silence was not passive. It was active. It was an agreement. It was a verdict. In that moment, she chose him. She chose this life, this apartment, this 5-year plan over me. His words were the knife, but her silence was the hand that twisted it. A profound and terrifying shift happened inside me then. The searing pain of betrayal was there, a physical agony in my chest, but beneath it something else began to rise, a wave of glacial calm. The desperate, people-pleasing warmth I had expended for months was instantly extinguished. In its place was the cold, hard, and utterly clear understanding of my situation. I was a transaction that no longer provided a return. Slowly, with a steadiness that felt alien to my trembling insides, I placed my knife and fork down on my plate. The clink of the silverware was the only sound in the room. I raised my head and met Ryan's triumphant gaze without flinching. "You're right, Ryan," I said. My voice was even, stripped of all emotion. "Kindness should never be taken for granted."
I then turned to my daughter. She finally looked up, and I saw fear in her eyes. She knew, on some level, what she had just done. "Thank you for dinner, Sophia," I said, my tone polite and distant, as if speaking to a stranger. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and walked to my small bedroom. I did not run, I did not cry. I closed the door softly behind me, shutting them out. The time for absorbing their cruelty was over. The time for action had just begun. The room they had given me was a glorified closet, a space previously used for storing holiday decorations and old college textbooks. It held a narrow twin bed, a small particle board dresser, and, in the corner, the two worn burgundy suitcases that represented the sum total of my worldly possessions. They were my past, and as I looked at them in the dim light, I knew they were also my future. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. I pulled the larger suitcase onto the bed and unzipped it. The action was crisp and final. I opened the dresser drawers and began to take out my clothes, not in a frantic rush, but with a methodical, almost ceremonial precision. Each sweater was folded into a neat square. Each blouse was smoothed of its wrinkles. This wasn't just packing. It was a ritual of reclamation. I was shedding the identity they had given me, Eleanor, the dependent, the burden, and re-inhabiting my own. I was Eleanor Vance, a woman preparing for a journey. My hands faltered only once, when I picked up the silver-framed photograph of Robert and me from our wedding day. We were so young, so ridiculously full of hope. His arm was wrapped tightly around my waist, his smile so wide it crinkled the corners of his eyes. A wave of grief, sharp and debilitating, washed over me. "Oh, Robert, what would you do?" The answer came to me as clearly as if he'd spoken it aloud. "You'd tell me to hold my head high, Ellie. You'd never let anyone, not for a second, make you feel small." His memory was a spine of steel. I carefully wrapped the photo in a soft wool scarf and tucked it securely between two sweaters. My gaze then fell upon the few items I had bought to try and breathe some life into their sterile apartment. The porcelain teapot with its delicate blue willow pattern, purchased from a small antique shop. The little watercolor painting of the Oregon coast, its misty blues and greens a balm to my soul. They were small offerings, attempts to plant a garden in concrete. I picked them up. A bitter part of me wanted to leave them, to let them serve as a silent rebuke. But no, they were mine. They were symbols of an effort that had been quantified and dismissed as insufficient. I would not leave a single fragment of my goodwill behind for them to discard or ignore. I found a sturdy tote bag and gently placed the teapot and the painting inside. They would come with me. From the living room, I could hear the low murmur of their voices. It rose in pitch, a brief, sharp argument, and then fell into a heavy silence. I waited. I listened for the sound of footsteps approaching my door, for a soft knock, for a whispered apology. Nothing came. The silence from their side of the door confirmed the silence from the dinner table. They were content to let me disappear. By midnight, my work was done. The two suitcases stood at attention by the door, my tote bag beside them like a loyal attendant. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. Sleep was a foreign country. I lay in the dark, my eyes wide open, staring at the textured ceiling. I replayed Sophia's silence over and over, analyzing it like a detective examining a clue. And I realized, with a chilling sense of clarity, that it was a legacy. My own mother, Lily, had been a woman of quiet endurance. She swallowed hurts to keep the peace, believing that a woman's strength was measured by her capacity to absorb pain without complaint. I had inherited that belief, confusing sacrifice with love. Tonight, I had finally learned the true cost of that inheritance. It was a slow, steady erosion of the self, and my account was now overdrawn. The shrill beep of the alarm was a welcome sound. It was a starting gun. In the pre-dawn gloom, I dressed quickly and silently. I found a notepad on the small desk and tore off a sheet. I would not write a letter filled with pain and accusations. That would give them the satisfaction of knowing they had wounded me. Instead, I wrote 6 simple words. I am returning what is mine. I walked into the living room. The plates from our last supper were still on the table, a monument to their indifference. I placed my note on the polished granite of the kitchen counter. Next to it, I carefully set down the blue willow teapot and the small coastal painting. Let them wake up to that. Let them decipher its meaning. I slipped out of the apartment as quietly as a thief in the night, the wheels of my suitcases a soft rumble on the hallway carpet. The elevator ride down felt like a descent into a new world. Outside, the Portland air was cold and damp, smelling of rain and asphalt. The streetlights cast long, lonely shadows. I hailed the first taxi that appeared, a yellow beacon in the darkness. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. I hesitated for only a heartbeat. "The Rosewood Inn, out on 82nd Avenue. It was a name I'd seen on a bus billboard, a budget motel that promised nothing more than a clean room and anonymity. It was exactly what I needed. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, I allowed myself one last look back at the imposing glass and steel building. It was just a structure, a box of sleeping strangers. It had never been a home. The motel room smelled sharply of bleach and air freshener, the scent of 1,000 transient lives. It was sterile and impersonal, and for that, I was grateful. I sat on the edge of the stiff polyester bedspread and finally pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over Sophia's name, the muscle memory of a lifetime. I resisted. Instead, I scrolled down and pressed call on the one person I knew would answer, no matter the hour. The phone rang twice before a familiar, warm voice, raspy with sleep, picked up. "Eleanor! Good heavens! Is everything all right?" It was Maggie, my friend of 40 years, my rock through marriage, motherhood, and widowhood. My carefully constructed composure shattered. "Maggie," I whispered, and the whole sordid story came tumbling out. The words, the silence, the crushing weight of it all. She listened without a single interruption. When I finally fell silent, the quiet on her end was not like Sophia's. It was the taut, humming silence of pure rage. "That little weasel," she hissed, her voice venomous. She didn't need to say Ryan's name. And Sophia? Oh, Eleanor! I could just throttle her. "I don't know what to do, Maggie," I confessed, the full terrifying reality of my situation finally crashing down on me. I was 62, homeless, with a dwindling savings account. "First," she said, her voice shifting from anger to command, "you stay right where you are. Second, you check your bank account in exactly 5 minutes. "What? No, Maggie, I can't let you do that. I'm not a charity case." "You listen to me, Eleanor Vance. This is not a discussion. This is not charity. This is a strategic investment in my best friend. You can pay me back, with interest, when you're running the world. Now, you try to get some sleep. We'll make a real plan tomorrow."
Before I could protest again, she hung up. A few minutes later, a notification lit up my phone screen. "Margaret Hale has sent you $500. The tears I had held back for hours finally came, hot and silent in the cold, impersonal room. They were not tears of self-pity. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude for a friendship that had proven stronger than blood. Margaret's simple, unwavering faith was the first brick laid in the foundation of my new life. I had been cast out, but I was not alone. The days at the Rosewood Inn began to blur into a dreary, beige-colored smear. My world shrank to the size of the motel room, with its stained carpet and a television that only got 3 channels. The morning routine was always the same: instant coffee that tasted like disappointment, followed by hours spent on the motel's spotty Wi-Fi, scrolling through online job boards. The $500 from Margaret was a precious lifeline, a buffer against total despair, but I watched my bank balance dwindle with a growing sense of panic. The digital world was a cold and unforgiving place for a 62-year-old woman whose resume had a 10-year gap. I was a ghost in the machine. My applications disappeared into corporate black holes, answered, if at all, by automated emails. "Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates. While your experience is impressive, we're looking for someone with a more current skill set." Each rejection was a small, sharp paper cut to my already wounded pride.
I was overqualified for entry-level jobs, underqualified for everything else. I was invisible. I tried calling Sophia once more, a week after I'd left. The call was a study in excruciating politeness. "Are you okay, Mom?" she asked, her voice tight and distant. "I'm fine, dear." "Good, that's good to hear." A pause. "Listen, I'm in the middle of a big project at work. I really have to run." She didn't ask where I was. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say, "I love you." The conversation was over in less than a minute. The chasm between us was no longer a silent gap, it was a screaming void. To save money and perhaps to feel a sense of purpose, I decided to clear out the small 10 by 10 storage unit I had rented after selling the house. It was the last outpost of my old life, a metal box crammed with the things I couldn't bring myself to discard. Robert's collection of woodworking tools that still smelled faintly of sawdust, boxes of his favorite paperback mysteries, and several large, sturdy trunks containing my mother's belongings. The air in the storage unit was stale and thick with the dust of forgotten things. I spent a full day sorting, creating piles for donation and trash. It was emotionally draining work, each object a landmine of memory. It was in the very last trunk, tucked beneath a pile of yellowed tablecloths that still carried the scent of my mother's lavender sachets, that my life changed forever. It was a diary. A small, leather-bound book, its cover softened with age. Embossed in faded gold leaf was a single name: Lily. That night, back in the sterile quiet of my motel room, with the hum of the ice machine outside my door as my only companion, I opened my mother's diary. I expected stories of a life I knew: her courtship with the man I called Dad, the joy of my birth, the simple rhythms of her days. And at first, that's what I found. Her neat, looping cursive told of dances and church socials, of learning to drive, and of her first job as a secretary. But as I turned the pages, delving into the year before she was married, the tone shifted. The neat script became a passionate, hurried scrawl. She wrote of a man named Harold Wilson. He was older, magnetic, a rising star in the Portland business world. Their affair was a secret, a whirlwind of clandestine meetings and stolen moments. He had swept her off her feet, promised her the world. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. He was married, a fact he had conveniently neglected to mention until the very end. My heart ached for the young, heartbroken woman my mother had been, but it was the final entry from that period, written in a shaky, tear-stained hand, that made the air leave my lungs. Harold is gone. He sent his lawyer, a kind man, with a final letter. He cannot leave his wife, his position, but he swears he will not abandon me. Or the child. Our child. He has established a trust to be managed by this lawyer, a Mr. Arthur Goldstein. A safety net, he called it, for his daughter, to ensure she will never have to depend on the kindness of any man. His daughter, a safety net, Mr. Arthur Goldstein. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. I read the passage again, my fingers tracing the faded ink. My entire life, my identity, the story I had told myself for 62 years, was a fiction. My father was not the kind, simple hardware store owner I had loved and mourned. He was Harold Wilson, a name I vaguely recognized from the business pages of the newspaper years ago, a local real estate magnate. A wild, desperate hope, the first genuine emotion besides grief and anger I had felt in weeks, surged through me. It was a ghost of a chance, a half-century-old secret whispered from a diary, but it was the only chance I had. The next morning, I used a precious portion of Margaret's investment to take a bus downtown. I felt a new energy, a sense of mission. At the Central Library, I spent hours hunched over a microfilm reader, scrolling through old city directories and legal archives. My back ached and my eyes burned, but I refused to give up. Finally, I found it. Goldstein and Associates, attorneys at law. The address was in one of Portland's older, more distinguished downtown buildings. The firm was still in business. Walking into that office was like stepping back in time. The air smelled of old paper, leather, and wood polish. A stern-looking receptionist peered at me over the top of her glasses, her expression a mixture of boredom and suspicion. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she doubted it. My voice trembled slightly, but I held my ground. "I'm here to see Mr. Arthur Goldstein. It's a personal matter. It concerns a trust established by the late Harold Wilson." The name Harold Wilson was a key. Her expression shifted from dismissal to cautious curiosity. She picked up her phone and murmured into it. A moment later, she nodded. "Mr. Goldstein will see you. Third door on the right." The office was vast, lined with ceiling-high bookshelves filled with leather-bound legal volumes. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat a man who must have been approaching 90. His body was frail, lost in the bulk of his chair, but his eyes were sharp and intensely intelligent. This was Arthur Goldstein. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice a dry, papery rustle. "Please, have a seat. My secretary said you mentioned Harold Wilson." I sat, my hands clutching my purse in my lap. I told him my story, my voice gaining strength as I spoke. I explained about my mother, Lily, about the diary, about the entry that had led me here, and when I finished, I held the diary out to him.
He didn't take it. He steepled his long, wrinkled fingers and studied me for a long, silent moment. "Mrs. Vance," he said finally, his tone professional but laced with weariness, "I appreciate you coming all this way, but over the decades, I cannot tell you how many people have sat in that very chair with similar stories. Harold Wilson was a very wealthy man. Hope can be a powerful motivator for creative storytelling." The implication was clear. He thought I was a con artist. A wave of hot anger washed over me, burning away my nervousness. "I am not a liar, Mr. Goldstein," I said, my voice low and firm. The Eleanor who would have crumpled under his dismissive gaze was gone. She had died at that dinner table. "Perhaps not," he conceded, "but the law does not operate on belief. It operates on proof, verifiable proof. Do you have any?" His question was a challenge, a wall built to keep me out. But instead of feeling defeated, I felt galvanized. This was a test. This was the first trial of my new life. "I will get it," I said. I left his office not with my tail between my legs, but with a fire in my belly. I went straight back to the storage unit, a woman possessed. I would not be dismissed. I would not be invisible. For 2 solid days, I tore through every box, every trunk, my hands becoming raw and grimy, my back screaming in protest. I was searching for a needle in a haystack of memories. And then, at the very bottom of a heavy trunk filled with my mother's old letters and photographs, I found it. A small, sealed manila envelope, yellowed with age. My mother's name was written on the front in her familiar script. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was my original birth certificate. And there it was, in crisp, typed letters, father's name, Harold Wilson. Tucked behind it was a faded black and white photograph of a handsome, smiling man with a confident air, his arm around my young, beautiful mother. On the back, in her handwriting, was a simple inscription, Harold and Lily, summer 61. I had my proof. The next day, I walked back into Arthur Goldstein's office. I didn't say a word. I simply walked to his desk and laid the birth certificate and the photograph on the polished wood in front of him. He picked up the birth certificate first, his eyes scanning the document. Then he picked up the photograph. He stared at it for what felt like an eternity. A strange, soft expression came over his face. When he finally looked up at me, the professional mask was gone. The skepticism in his eyes had been replaced by a look of profound, stunned recognition. "Lily's eyes," he whispered, his voice filled with a sudden raw emotion. "My God, you have your mother's eyes."
The atmosphere in the office had changed completely. The wall of professional skepticism had crumbled, replaced by a bridge of shared history. Mr. Goldstein, the formidable lawyer, became Arthur, the keeper of my mother's secret. He gestured for me to sit, his movements now carrying a gentle, almost paternal quality. Your mother, Eleanor, he began, his voice softer, was a remarkable woman, so proud, so resilient. After Harold ended things, she was devastated, but she refused to be a victim. He looked at the photograph again. She never touched a penny of the main fund while she was alive. I sent her statements every year as instructed. She always sent back a polite note saying she was fine. She said the trust wasn't for her. It was for you. It was for your future, a future she prayed you'd never need it for. He gave me a sad, knowing smile. It seems her foresight was a blessing. He turned in his large leather chair, it groaned in protest, and unlocked a deep drawer in his desk. He retrieved a thick ledger-style book bound in dark green leather. The pages were filled with neat handwritten entries and columns of figures. It was the financial history of my other life, the one I never knew I had. Harold was a complicated man, Arthur said, opening the ledger. He was ruthless in business, and his personal life was, messy. But he did right by you in his own way. He was adamant about the purpose of this trust. He told me, I want my daughter to always have a roof over her head, Arthur, and I want her to be the one holding the keys. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might break free. Holding the keys. What did he mean? Mrs. Vance, Eleanor, he corrected himself, his tone gentle, I need you to understand. The inheritance Harold left for you is not a simple pile of cash waiting in a bank account. Harold was a real estate man through and through. He didn't believe in the abstract nature of stocks alone. He believed in tangible assets. He believed in brick and mortar. He turned the heavy ledger around so I could see the open page. It was a meticulously kept list of assets, a portfolio of blue-chip stocks, a collection of municipal bonds, and one other entry that took up several lines. Arthur tapped that entry with a long, bony finger. My eyes struggled to focus on the spidery script, and then I saw it. The Willamide Arms Apartments, I read aloud, my voice a strangled whisper. It was the name of the building where Sophia and Ryan lived, the building I had fled in shame in just a few weeks ago, the building where I was told I was a freeloader. Arthur nodded slowly, his eyes watching me intently, gauging my reaction. Harold secretly acquired the building for your mother shortly after you were born. It was his way of giving her and you a piece of the city, a permanent anchor. It's been held to the trust ever since, managed rather passively, I'm afraid, by a third-party company. According to the explicit terms of the trust, upon the confirmation of your identity as Lily's legal heir, full ownership and control of all assets, including the building, transfer immediately to you. I stared at him, my mind a whirlwind of disbelief and a dawning terrifying sense of power. I was not just an heiress. I was a property owner. I was a landlord, my landlord, their landlord. What is it all worth? I finally managed to ask, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. The stock portfolio, after decades of conservative growth and reinvested dividends, is currently valued at approximately $500,000. The building itself, even in its current somewhat neglected state, is appraised at over $1 million. However, he held up a cautionary hand, I must be clear. The liquid cash in the trust's operating account is more modest, about $200,000. The building is underperforming, the rents are below market rate, and maintenance has been deferred for years. It needs work. It needs an owner. A wave of vertigo swept over me. This wasn't a winning lottery ticket. This wasn't a magic wand that would make all my problems disappear. This was a business. It was a complex, tangled entity with responsibilities, balance sheets, maintenance schedules, and tenants. It was power, yes, but it was the kind of power that came with a heavy, burdensome weight.
For a fleeting, terrifying moment, I felt utterly unqualified. Me, Eleanor Vance, a woman whose most complex financial decision in the last decade had been choosing between different brands of canned tomatoes, was now in charge of a multi-million-dollar estate. I wanted to run, to tell him it was too much, to ask him to just give me enough for a small, quiet life.
But then, the image of Ryan's smug, contemptuous face flashed in my mind. I heard his voice sneering the word charity. I saw the flicker of pity and dismissal in Sophia's eyes. The terror receded, burned away by a surge of cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just a building, it was a stage. It was a chessboard, and I had just been handed the most powerful piece on the board. I sat up straighter in my chair, the feeling of the plush leather against my back no longer intimidating, but supportive. I looked Arthur Goldstein directly in the eye. "Mr. Goldstein," I said, my voice clear and steady, all traces of the frightened motel dweller gone. "What is the first step to assuming control?" A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, admiring smile that reached his ancient, intelligent eyes. "The first step, Eleanor, is to establish a legal entity to act on your behalf, a limited liability company. It will shield you personally, and, more importantly, it will allow you to operate with complete anonymity." "Anonymity," I repeated, the word tasting like a fine, expensive wine. "I like the sound of that very much." "Do you have a name in mind for your new company?" he asked, pulling a fresh legal pad towards him, ready to build my new identity. I thought of my mother, Lily, the woman whose quiet strength and secret foresight had just reached across 50 years to save me. I thought of the flower that symbolized her, the camellia, a flower of purity, devotion, and quiet, resilient beauty that can bloom even in the winter. "Yes," I said, a sense of profound certainty settling over me. "Call it Camellia Properties." Of course, at the time, I didn't know the full story. I didn't know the depth of the financial quicksand Ryan was sinking in. It was only later, through the cold, impartial lens of legal discovery and credit checks that Camellia Properties was entitled to run, that I pieced together the desperate portrait of my son-in-law. While I was counting my dwindling dollars at the Rosewood Inn, Ryan was dodging calls from creditors. His grand 5-year plan wasn't a dream for the future, it was a frantic attempt to escape his present. He had taken a significant portion of their savings, and, I suspected, a chunk of the money I had given them from my house sale, and had plunged it into high-risk tech stocks, chasing a fantasy of getting rich quick. The market had turned, and he had been wiped out. To compound his failure, the promotion at his marketing firm, the one he had been boasting about for months, had evaporated. It had gone to a younger, sharper colleague who spoke the language of social media and analytics, a language Ryan had dismissed as a passing fad. He was facing a mountain of secret debt and a stalled career. His entire identity, built on a foundation of perceived success and financial superiority, was crumbling. So he had turned on me. In the twisted logic of a desperate man, I was the perfect scapegoat. I wasn't a person, I was a line item on a budget he could no longer afford. My presence in his home was a constant, living embodiment of his failure. Every meal I cooked, every dollar I cost in groceries, was another reminder that he was not the master of his universe he pretended to be. Getting rid of me wasn't just about saving money, it was a pathetic, cruel attempt to reclaim a sliver of control, to feel powerful by making someone else feel powerless. His cruelty was a shield for his insecurity, and he used it to manipulate my daughter. I can almost hear the conversations, the way he would have twisted the narrative. "She's holding us back, Soph. We'll never get that cabin, never see Italy with this constant drain on our resources. It's for the best. It's for us." He would have made her feel that her loyalty to me was a betrayal of him, of their future. It was in my third week of this new life, as I was spending my days in Arthur's library, poring over books on property management and corporate law, that my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a Zelle transfer. Sophia Vance has sent you $200. The message attached was simple. Hope you're doing okay. My heart twisted into a painful knot. $200. It was a pittance, a gesture of guilt so small it was insulting. It was her attempt to buy a clear conscience, to soothe the nagging voice that must have been telling her she had done a monstrous thing. It was an attempt to reestablish the old dynamic. She, the successful daughter, helping her poor, dependent mother. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the accept button. The old Eleanor, the woman who craved any scrap of connection, would have accepted it with tearful gratitude. She would have seen it as an olive branch, a sign that her daughter still cared. But I was not the old Eleanor. The old Eleanor had been burned to ashes. With a cold, deliberate precision, I opened the banking app. I initiated a transfer, I sent the $200 right back to her, and I attached my own message. 6 words that would serve as the founding constitution of our new relationship. I can take care of myself. I didn't add a thank you. I didn't add a love, Mom. I simply stated a fact. It was a closing of a door, a severing of a cord. It was a declaration of my independence and her irrelevance to my survival. I could almost feel her shock through the phone, the sting of her rejected guilt offering. I wanted her to feel it. I wanted her to understand that the power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. She could no longer appease me or herself with money. From this day forward, respect was the only currency I would accept, and her account was severely overdrawn. My life transformed. The dreary motel room was replaced by a small, clean, furnished apartment that Arthur helped me find, paid for by the trust. My days were no longer about survival. They were about strategy. They were filled with meetings. I met with accountants who taught me about cash flow and amortization. I met with contractors who explained the difference between cosmetic fixes and structural necessities. And most importantly, I met with the property manager Arthur had recommended, a quiet, impeccably dressed man named Mr. Chen. Mr. Chen was a master of efficiency and discretion. He spoke in precise, clipped sentences, his face a mask of professional calm. He was the perfect general to execute my campaign. "The building has good bones, Mrs. Vance," he reported after his initial, thorough inspection, presenting me with a detailed, multi-page report. But the previous management company was running on autopilot. The elevators are a constant source of tenant complaints. The lighting in the common areas is dim and, frankly, unsafe. The courtyard is a concrete wasteland. Tenant morale is low. "I want to change all of that, Mr. Chen," I said, looking up from his report, "but I want to do it quietly. The tenants should see the work, but they shouldn't see me." A flicker of understanding crossed his otherwise impassive face. "Understood. All communications will come from the office of Camellia Properties. You, officially, do not exist." Instead of hiding in an office, I began my own reconnaissance. I dressed down in simple slacks, a comfortable coat, and a plain scarf, looking like any other woman of a certain age. I started taking daily walks around my new property. I wanted to see it not as an asset on a balance sheet, but as a home. I wanted to understand its rhythms, its flaws, its people. I saw the peeling paint in the stairwells and the flickering fluorescent light in the laundry room. I saw a group of kids kicking a crushed soda can against a brick wall in the barren courtyard, their only playground. I saw the weary slump of a nurse's shoulders as she waited for the groaning, painfully slow elevator after a 12-hour shift. One afternoon, I saw an elderly woman struggling with 2 heavy grocery bags near the main entrance. I hurried to help her. Her name was Mrs. Davis, a resident of the 4th floor for 15 years. "Oh, thank you, dear," she said, her voice breathy. "It's a shame. This used to be such a lovely building, but the old owners just didn't care. The front door lock has been broken for 6 months. Anyone can just walk in." I listened to every word she said, filing it away. This wasn't just idle chat. It was invaluable market research. My first official directive as the owner of Camellia Properties was not to raise the rent. It was to spend. I authorized the funds from the trust's cash account, the same account Ryan had unknowingly dismissed as insignificant. My instructions to Mr. Chen were clear and specific. "First," I said, my voice crisp, "overhaul the elevators, both of them. I want them to be the fastest, quietest, most reliable elevators in Portland. Second, replace every single light fixture in the hallways, stairwells, and lobby with bright, energy-efficient LEDs. Third, hire a 24/7 security service for the front desk and install a new high-security key fob entry system on all exterior doors. And finally," I paused, picturing the sad little courtyard, "hire a landscape architect. I want benches, flowers, a proper lawn, and a small, safe play structure for the children." Mr. Chen's perfectly groomed eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "That is an aggressive and expensive schedule of improvements, Mrs. Vance. A significant capital outlay before seeing any return on your investment. Consider it an investment in goodwill, Mr. Chen. A down payment on tenant loyalty." Within 2 weeks, the Willamette Arms became a hive of activity. The sounds of construction replaced the silence of neglect. Electricians rewired the halls. Painters swarmed the stairwells. The old clanking elevators were taken out of service one at a time, and sleek new machines were installed in their place. Mr. Chen's office sent a professionally worded letter to every resident, except, of course, Unit 3B, apologizing for the temporary inconvenience and outlining the exciting schedule of upgrades. The letter was signed simply, "The Management, Camellia Properties." A month after the work began, the transformation was stunning. The hallways were bright and welcoming. The new elevators were silent and swift. The courtyard was no longer a concrete scar, but a budding oasis with fresh green sod and newly planted flower beds. A palpable sense of optimism and pride began to spread through the building. The residents started smiling at each other in the hallways. It was only then, once the foundation of goodwill had been firmly laid and the residents saw Camellia Properties as their benefactor, that I gave Mr. Chen his second directive. "It's time to adjust the rental rates, Mr. Chen," I said during our weekly meeting. A standard across-the-board increase to offset the costs of the capital improvements?" he asked, his pen poised over his notepad. "Not exactly," I replied, a cold knot of satisfaction tightening in my stomach. "I want you to draft 2 different letters. The first letter is for every tenant in the building, except for Unit 3B. It will announce a modest 20% rent increase, effective in 60 days. It will attribute the increase to the extensive building upgrades, improved security, and rising property taxes. It should also thank them for their patience during the renovations and express our hope that they will continue to enjoy their homes at the Willamette Arms." He nodded, making a neat note. "And the second letter?" I took a deep, steadying breath. This was the moment, the culmination of weeks of planning. "The second letter is for Unit 3B only, for Mr. Ryan and Mrs. Sophia Sterling. Their rent will be increased by 100%.
Mr. Chen looked up from his notepad, his professional mask slipping for just a fraction of a second. His eyes betrayed a flicker of surprise, but he was too much of a professional to ask why. He simply asked, "And the justification for the discrepancy?" "The justification," I said, my voice quiet but as hard as steel, "is an adjustment to reflect current market rates for units that have not received interior upgrades in over 5 years, which I believe is entirely accurate. They've done nothing to the place." He simply nodded again, his face once more an impassive mask. "It will be done, Mrs. Vance." That evening, I imagined the 2 letters being printed on Camellia Properties' letterhead, sealed in crisp white envelopes. One, a message of reasonable shared progress to a community of valued residents. The other, a targeted, precision-guided missile aimed directly at the heart of my daughter and son-in-law's complacent, cruel little world. The trap was meticulously set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the satisfying snap of it closing. The call from Mr. Chen came 3 days after the letters had been mailed. I had been anticipating it, picturing the scene in their apartment when the crisp, white envelope arrived. "The tenant in Unit 3B has been in touch," Mr. Chen said, his voice as dry and factual as a weather report announcing a hurricane. "I imagine he was," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. I settled back in my comfortable armchair, ready for the details. "He demanded to know the meaning of the discriminatory and illegal rent hike. He threatened legal action against Camellia Properties. He used a great deal of unprofessional language, which I will not repeat." "And what was your response, Mr. Chen?" "I calmly reiterated the justification provided in the letter regarding the adjustment to current market rates. I also took the liberty of reminding him that, as his original lease had expired, his tenancy was now on a month-to-month basis. He is, of course, free to give his 30-day notice if the new terms are not agreeable to him." A month-to-month tenancy, the final beautiful nail in the coffin of his security. He had no legal ground to stand on. He was trapped. "Excellent, Mr. Chen. You handled that perfectly. Keep me apprised of any further communications." The next development, however, I witnessed with my own eyes. A few days later, I was sitting in a small coffee shop across the street from the Willamette Arms, a habit I had developed. It was my version of a general surveying her battlefield. I saw Sophia emerge from the building. She was talking to Mrs. Davis, the friendly woman I had helped with her groceries. I was too far away to hear, but I could read their body language perfectly. Mrs. Davis was beaming, gesturing with enthusiasm at the newly painted lobby doors and the planters overflowing with bright red geraniums. She was the picture of a happy resident. Sophia, on the other hand, looked tense and miserable. She was nodding, but her posture was stiff, her smile forced. At one point, Mrs. Davis patted her arm sympathetically, then said something that made Sophia's face flush a deep, painful red. She mumbled a hasty goodbye and practically fled back into the building, leaving a bewildered Mrs. Davis staring after her.
I knew exactly what had happened. Mrs. Davis, bless her heart, had likely been gushing about the wonderful new owners, perhaps even mentioning the reasonable rent increase in exchange for such marvelous improvements. And Sophia had been forced to stand there and listen, knowing that in her own apartment, her husband was probably punching walls over a rent notice that was anything but reasonable. She was being squeezed. The walls were closing in, not just financially, but socially. Her neighbors were happy. The building was improving. The narrative Ryan was trying to spin, that they were victims of a greedy, faceless corporation, was falling apart. The simple, undeniable truth was that Camellia Properties was a good landlord, which meant that if only one tenant was being punished, there had to be a reason. The shame of it must have been eating her alive. The final piece of the trap clicked into place a week after that. My phone rang, and my heart gave a little jump when I saw Sophia's name on the screen. "Mom?" she said, her voice small and thin, stripped of its earlier defensiveness. Can we talk?" We met at a neutral location, a quiet, anonymous cafe in a neighborhood neither of us frequented. She looked exhausted. The dark circles under her eyes were more pronounced, and she fidgeted nervously with a sugar packet, tearing it into tiny shreds. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. The story came tumbling out, a torrent of misery and frustration. "It's a nightmare, Mom," she began. "Ryan's going crazy. He's on the phone all day, yelling at the management company. He's trying to organize the other tenants, but no one will listen to him. They all like the new owners." She said the word "like" as if it were a personal betrayal. "And the money," she trailed off, shaking her head. "We can't afford it. We just can't. This landlord, this company, they're monsters. They're trying to ruin us. It's predatory. It's evil. Ryan says we should get a lawyer, that we should sue them for everything they've got." I listened patiently, my expression calm. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my chamomile tea, letting her frantic energy dissipate into the quiet atmosphere of the cafe. The irony was so thick, so delicious, I could have bottled it. My daughter, seeking sympathy from the very monster she was describing. When she finally ran out of words, her shoulders slumped in defeat, I set my cup down. "And what do you think, Sophia?" I asked quietly. "What?" she asked, looking confused. "Ryan says you should sue. What do you think? Do you think it's evil to want to be paid what your property is worth? Do you think it's predatory to install new elevators and security systems to keep your residents safe?" She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. She had come here for a co-conspirator, for me to join her in righteous indignation. Instead, I was presenting her with a logic problem, forcing her to confront the gaping holes in her own narrative. "But it's not fair," she insisted, her voice rising. "Why just us? Why are they targeting us?" "Perhaps," I said, choosing my words with surgical precision, "this new owner is a savvy business person. Perhaps they looked at the books and saw a severely undervalued asset. Business isn't about being fair, Sophia. It's about value. It's a lesson your husband was so very keen to teach me not so long ago." She flinched as if I'd physically slapped her. The color drained from her face. The connection, the terrible, dawning possibility, was beginning to form in her mind. I could see it in her eyes. I have to go," she stammered, fumbling for her purse. She stood up so quickly that her chair scraped loudly against the floor, turning the heads of the other patrons. As she turned to flee, I delivered one final, quiet blow. "Sophia," I said, my voice stopping her in her tracks, "sooner or later, everyone in life has to choose which side of the road they're on. The side of the builders, the people who create value, or the side of the complainers, the people who only see what's in it for them. You should think about where you want to stand." She walked out of the cafe without looking back. I knew I had given her an impossible choice: cling to the sinking ship of her marriage and her husband's toxic narrative, or start swimming towards the lonely, terrifying shore of accountability. The stage was now set for the final public act of this drama. Ryan's last desperate gambit was to force a public confrontation. He managed to bully and cajole a handful of other residents to sign a petition demanding a building-wide tenant meeting. He framed it as an act of community solidarity, a chance to present a united front against the faceless management company. Mr. Chen, following my explicit instructions, agreed to the meeting immediately, offering the newly refurbished common room as the venue. I arrived early on the evening of the meeting. I had chosen my armor carefully.
A simple but elegant navy blue dress, low heels, and a single strand of pearls that had belonged to my mother. I wanted to look calm, professional, and utterly in control. I took a seat in the back row, positioning myself as just another anonymous observer. Mr. Chen stood at a small lectern at the front of the room, his posture as straight and unyielding as a pillar of granite. The tenants began to trickle in. Most of them looked relaxed, even curious. They chatted amongst themselves, complimenting the new paint and the comfortable armchairs. Mrs. Davis spotted me and gave me a warm, conspiratory wink. Ryan and Sophia were the last to arrive. Ryan strode in with a belligerent swagger, a man trying to project a confidence he clearly didn't feel. He carried a folder stuffed with papers, his weapon for the battle to come. Sophia trailed in his wake like a ghost, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Her gaze met mine for a fleeting second. I saw a flicker of surprise, then a wave of dawning dread. She quickly looked away. Ryan, without any formal introduction, took the floor. He launched into an impassioned, self-pitying tirade that was clearly rehearsed. He spoke of corporate greed, of the plight of the working man, of faceless companies preying on innocent families. He tried to cast himself as a populist hero, a David fighting the Goliath of Camellia Properties. "This company," he said, his voice ringing with false sincerity, "they hide behind their slick lawyers and their stone-faced managers. They don't have the guts to face us, the people whose lives they are destroying." When he finished, there was a scattered, half-hearted smattering of applause from the few allies he had managed to recruit. Most of the room remained silent, looking uncomfortable. Then a clear, strong voice cut through the awkward silence. It was Mrs. Davis. She had stood up. "Well, I, for one, am grateful," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I've lived in this building for 15 years, and this is the first time in a long time that I felt proud to call it home. The new owners have done more for us in 2 months than the old ones did in a decade. So if a small rent increase is what it takes to live in a clean, safe building, then I say it's worth every penny." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Several people nodded emphatically. Ryan's face fell. His Unity front had just been publicly dismantled by a woman in her 70s. His composure began to crack. He turned on Mr. Chen, his frustration making him reckless. "I want to speak to the owner. Where is he? Is he too much of a coward to show his face? I'm tired of dealing with his hired help." Mr. Chen looked calmly at the angry, sputtering man. He said, "The owner is not here this evening. However, they have sent a special consultant to address your concerns directly."
As if on cue, all eyes turned to me as I stood up and walked slowly and deliberately to the front of the room. A confused silence fell over the residents. Ryan stared at me, his mouth hanging open. "Hello, everyone," I said, my voice amplified by the room's good acoustics. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I am a senior consultant for Camellia Properties." Ryan let out a bark of derisive laughter. "A consultant? You? We don't want to talk to a consultant. We want to talk to the person in charge." I ignored him, turning my attention to the rest of the room. I held up a thin file folder. "I have been authorized to speak on the owner's behalf, and I have the numbers right here. For the past 5 years, the operating costs for the Willamette Arms have steadily increased, while rental income has remained flat. The previous owners deferred essential maintenance on everything from the plumbing to the roof, putting everyone's quality of life and even safety at risk." I paused, letting my words sink in. Then I looked directly at Ryan. The recent renovations, the new elevators, the 24/7 security, the complete lighting overhaul, the courtyard landscaping, cost a total of $187,000, a significant investment in this community. The modest 20% rent increase for most of the building doesn't even cover those costs in the first year. It is simply a necessary step towards making this property financially sustainable for the long term. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the other tenants. They were nodding. I wasn't attacking, I was explaining. I was treating them like intelligent adults. Now, I continued, my voice hardening just a fraction, regarding Unit 3B. I opened the file. That specific unit has not had a rent increase in over 5 years, despite market rates in this neighborhood increasing by more than 40% in that same period. The current adjustment, while significant, simply brings the unit in line with its actual current market value. I close the file with a soft, final snap. Camellia Properties believes in providing a safe, high-quality living environment for all its residents. It also believes in fair market value. There is nothing predatory or personal about it. It's just good business. The room was utterly silent. I had systematically, publicly, and dispassionately dismantled Ryan's entire emotional argument, not with anger, but with cold, irrefutable facts. He was exposed for what he was, not a crusader for the common man, but a selfish, entitled man who wanted a premium lifestyle at a discount price, expecting everyone else to subsidize it. He stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief and impotent fury. He was cornered, humiliated, and out of ammunition. Who the hell do you think you are? He sputtered, his voice cracking. You're just some hired help, some pencil pusher. I demand to speak to the owner. I want to talk to the person who's actually in charge. I looked at him, and for the first time that evening, I allowed myself a small, tight, and utterly triumphant smile. The final move of the chess match, the checkmate. I'm listening, Ryan, I said. The meaning of my words landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. A collective gasp went up. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horrified, complete understanding. Mrs. Davis's jaw dropped. Ryan's face went from red to a ghastly, bloodless white. He finally understood. I wasn't a consultant. I wasn't hired help. I was the owner. I was Camellia Properties. His queen had just been taken by the pawn he had contemptuously swept off the board weeks ago. For a long, suspended moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The air in the room was thick with the electricity of the revelation. Ryan stood frozen, a statue of impotent rage, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief. The man who had built his identity on being the one in control, the one who made the rules, had just been publicly unmasked as a tenant living on the mercy of the woman he had discarded. The humiliation was absolute. When he finally found his voice, it was a guttural snarl of pure, undiluted fury. You? He spat, the word a projectile of venom. You did all this? The renovations? The letters? This whole charade? This was all just some sick, twisted game of revenge? I would call it a business lesson, Ryan, I replied, my voice dangerously quiet, each word a carefully placed stone. You were the one who taught me that my presence in your home was a matter of finances, not family. You clarified our relationship. I simply applied that lesson to my own property. You're a vindictive old woman, he shouted, his last shred of composure snapping. He took a heavy, menacing step towards me, his hands clenched into fists. But before he could take a second step, a figure moved swiftly to stand between us. It was Sophia. She stood with her back to me, a human shield, facing the husband she had chosen over me just weeks before. She was no longer the wavering, uncertain woman from the cafe. Her back was ramrod straight, her chin was up, and her eyes, her father's kind eyes, were blazing with a righteous fire I had never seen in her before. She said, "No, Ryan, stop. Just stop. Get out of the way, Sophia," he growled, his face contorted with rage. "No," she said, again, her voice stronger this time, cutting through his anger. "This is about you. It has always been about you. Your lies, your pride, your bottomless insecurity, your cruelty." She gestured vaguely around the room, at the new lights, the clean walls. "She didn't do this to us. You did. You pushed her out. You treated her like she was nothing. You told me she was weak. She turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting mine over her shoulder. In her eyes, I saw a universe of regret, but also a dawning, painful respect. You were wrong. Ryan was stunned into silence by her mutiny. He had lost control of the narrative, of the room, and now, in the most public way imaginable, he had lost control of his wife. Sophia turned fully to face me then. The fire in her eyes softened, replaced by a look of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. "Mom," she whispered, the word itself a fragile bridge across the chasm of pain that had separated us. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't a justification. It was a simple, unadorned admission of her failure, of her cowardice. It was the beginning of accountability. Then she turned back to Ryan, her decision made, her voice firm and final. "I'm done, Ryan. I can't do this anymore. I can't live in your world of lies and resentment. I can't be this person anymore." Without waiting for a response, without a single backward glance, she turned and walked, not to me, but towards the exit of the common room. She wasn't running to her mother for protection. She was walking on her own 2 feet away from the life that had suffocated her and towards an unknown, terrifying but authentic future of her own making. Her exit was not an act of weakness, but the first true act of strength I had ever seen from her. The meeting dissolved in the wake of her departure. People began to file out, casting sympathetic and admiring glances at me and looks of utter contempt at the man left standing alone in the center of the room. He was a king dethroned in his own crumbling kingdom. The last I saw of him, he had sunk into one of the new armchairs, his head in his hands, a man utterly and completely defeated. Justice hadn't been a loud, fiery explosion. It was a quiet, meticulous, and public dismantling. And it was, in its own terrible way, a masterpiece.
There was no neat cinematic fade to black. There was no 6 months later title card to magically resolve the messy, painful aftermath. The fallout was real, quiet, and complicated. Sophia did not come home with me that night. She did not fall into my arms for a tearful reunion. Instead, she packed a single suitcase and checked into an anonymous hotel, echoing the very first act of my own liberation. A few days later, she rented a small, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It was a place with mismatched furniture and bare walls, a stark contrast to the sleek, curated life she had shared with Ryan. She got a job. Not a glamorous career, but a steady position as a receptionist at a dental clinic. It was a humbling step down from the lifestyle she had known, but every dollar she earned was hers. Every piece of furniture she bought, every bill she paid was a testament to her own effort. She was building a life, not just inhabiting one. Our reconciliation was not a single event, but a slow, painstaking process. It was like rebuilding a bombed-out structure, brick by painful brick, with no guarantee that the foundation was still sound. It started with a text message from her, a week after the tenant meeting. 4 simple words. "Just wanted you to know I'm okay." I waited a full hour before I replied, choosing my own 4 words with equal care. "I know you are." A week after that, we met for coffee. The first 10 minutes were a study in excruciating silence. We both stared into our cups, the air between us thick with unspoken apologies and accusations. Finally, she looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I was a coward, Mom," she said, her voice raw. "There's no other word for it. I was so afraid of losing him, of losing the life he gave me, that I didn't realize I was losing myself. I lost you." "Yes, you did," I said. My voice was not unkind, but it was not soft either. It was the voice of truth. "But the thing about being lost, Sophia, is that you can always be found. The real question is whether you're willing to do the hard work of finding your way back." She nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. She understood. There would be no easy absolution. Forgiveness had to be earned. Trust had to be rebuilt. She started coming over to my new small apartment on Saturdays. At first, she would just sit quietly in my armchair, reading a book while I went over the building's accounts at my small desk. Then she started asking questions. What's a depreciation schedule? How do you handle a tenant dispute when they're late on rent? What's the difference between a capital improvement and a maintenance expense? She was learning the language of my new world, the language of responsibility and ownership. One day, she offered to help me organize the filing cabinet, which was overflowing with receipts and invoices. It was a small gesture, but it was significant. She was no longer a guest in my life. She was trying to be a participant. I managed the Willamette Arms for another year. I learned every corner of that building, every resident's name, every leaky faucet and squeaky floorboard. I took pride in it. I transformed it from a neglected property into a thriving community. When I finally sold it, I did so at a substantial profit. The market recognized the value I had created. With the proceeds, I bought myself a small house, not a grand mansion, but a cozy 2-bedroom bungalow with a large, sun-drenched garden. It was more than enough for me. It was a home built not on the compromises of a marriage, but on the foundation of my own strength. The bulk of the money, the true heart of Harold Wilson and my mother Lily's legacy, went into something far more important. I worked with Arthur Boldstein, who had become a dear friend and mentor, to establish a charitable foundation. We called it the Lily Legacy. Its mission was simple and direct: to provide grants and support services for women over 50 who were facing homelessness and unemployment, to give them the second chance that I was so miraculously fortunate to have received. One sunny Saturday afternoon, about a year and a half after that fateful dinner, Sophia was in my new garden with me. Her hands were dark with rich soil as she helped me plant a row of camellias. She had finalized her divorce from Ryan. She was paying her own bills, living within her own means. She was quieter than she used to be, but her silence was no longer one of weakness. It was one of thoughtful strength. "You know," I said, patting the soil around the base of a new plant, the scent of damp earth filling the air, "your grandfather, Harold, he left me this inheritance, all this money. But after all this time, I've realized that wasn't the real gift." She looked at me, her brow furrowed in curiosity. "The real gift," I continued, looking out at the beautiful flowers that bore my mother's name, "was the lesson. The lesson that money can buy you a building, but it can't buy you dignity. It can't buy you self-respect. That's something you have to build yourself, from the ground up, just like you're doing." She ran to hats with camellias, my mother,